17. Katie Nauman and Kyla Cole. In August 2016, a pair of South Carolina women learned the hard way that you can't just get naked and jump into swimming pools that don't belong to you without risking a visit from the police. 23-year-old Katie Norman and 32-year-old Kyla Cole allegedly made a racket during a late-night skinny dip outside a Myrtle Beach apartment complex, prompting residents to call law enforcement. Responding officers arrived to find the women completely naked in the building's outdoor pool. They'd apparently decided to go swimming in the buff because they didn't have bathing suits with them. They were also joined by two friends who lived in the apartment complex. According to the authorities, the entire group showed signs of being highly intoxicated. Police told the quartet to stay where they were, while officers ran warrant checks on everyone, but Norman and Cole began walking away. When an officer told them not to go anywhere, Norman allegedly became belligerent and kicked him in the groin. The women were each charged with one misdemeanor count of indecent exposure, and Norman was charged with assaulting a police officer. They were released on bail and haven't appeared in any news headlines since, indicating that they most likely squared the matter away and quietly moved on with their lives. 16. Naked traveler takes a different kind of trip. In November 2023, a woman in her 20s decided it would be a good idea to get drunk and high on magic mushrooms at a party in Santiago, Chile, before heading to the airport to catch a flight. During her time at Arturo Merino Benitez International Airport, she walked around completely naked and went on a drug-induced rampage. The woman was first seen talking to a man pushing a luggage cart. She appeared to hug, embrace, and climb on him while wrapping her legs around him. She was also seen trying to kiss the man. When the traveler pushed her away, she grabbed a bottle out of his cart and threw it on the floor. The man walked away, and the intoxicated partygoer headed in another direction. In another area, the woman was seen charging toward passengers, shouting, "I hate you," and trying to hit a couple. She also grabbed a woman by the hair and threw her to the ground in a parking lot and slapped a police officer in the face while he was trying to escort her away from the public. She then attacked another cop before the two officers subdued her. The woman's identity and the outcome of the ordeal are unclear, but it's probably safe to assume that she sobered up in custody, possibly received some criminal charges, and was sent on her way. 15. Brisa Dominguez. Early one morning in July of 2017, a night manager at a hotel in Clearwater, Florida dialed 911 and asked for help kicking out a trespasser. The employee told police that he'd ordered 25-year-old Brisa Dominguez to leave the hotel because she was creating a disturbance. But they claimed that the young woman snuck into a guest's room after pretending that she was going to leave. According to an arrest report, Dominguez was naked and seemed intoxicated when officers arrived at the property. One of the cops handed her a towel to cover herself up with. But instead of using it for its intended purpose, she allegedly whipped the officer in the face with it. The young woman was also accused of kicking, spitting at, and trying to bite the police while they took her into custody. As a result, Dominguez was charged with trespassing, resisting an officer with violence, and battery on a law enforcement officer. She bailed out of jail for $10,250 and was potentially facing serious consequences. However, her sultry mugshot also attracted thousands of new social media followers, helping to boost her success as an Instagram model. While the outcome of her criminal case is unclear, she remains active on social media with a fan base of nearly 700,000 and counting. 14. Duron Hudson. In August 2019, police identified 18-year-old Duron Hudson of Hyattsville, Maryland, as the suspected killer of 22-year-old George Hendricks, who had recently been gunned down in cold blood in southeast Washington, D.C. During the manhunt that ensued, officers and U.S. Marshals from the Capital Area Regional Fugitive Task Force traced Hudson to a home in Landover, Maryland. The team tried to arrest the teenager, who fled the residence naked and managed to evade capture. Speaking with ABC7 following the failed apprehension attempt, a neighbor described seeing a man running into a nearby forest full sprint in his birthday suit. 4 days later, members of law enforcement saw Hudson entering a residence in Washington, D.C. This time, they moved in on the scene determined not to let him get away. Officers from the Fugitive Task Force stormed the home and found Hudson hiding in a mattress. In an unexpected twist, a judge determined that there was a lack of probable cause and dropped the murder charge. But just another 2 months later, Hudson was accused of killing another victim, 50-year-old Nazil Zaid Abdul Rahim. Rahim was fatally struck by a vehicle during what appeared to be a road rage dispute. Hudson was originally charged with second-degree murder, but took a deal in 2023 and pleaded guilty to attempted robbery, involuntary manslaughter while armed, multiple assault counts, theft, and unlawful use of a motor vehicle. The agreement came with an 8.5-year prison sentence followed by 5 years of supervised release. 13. Kerry Haynes. During a visit to an Orlando apartment complex in early 2018, a leasing agent spotted a naked tenant working out in the building's gym. She alerted a maintenance worker to what she'd seen, and he confronted 57-year-old Kerry Haynes, who was shamelessly pedaling away on a stationary bike. When the employee asked him what he was doing, he simply said, "I'm working out." Footage captured from inside the gym later showed that Haynes had exercised naked on virtually every piece of equipment. He left the gym after being informed that the police had been called and was subsequently seen lying naked in the grass next to a nearby pond. He was engaging in an inappropriate act, which was witnessed firsthand by an Orange County deputy who was responding to the 911 call. The deputy handcuffed Haynes and accompanied him to his apartment, where they noticed a pile of clothing on the living room floor. Haynes was arrested on suspicion of indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, and exposure of his privates. He was taken to jail where he was held on $700 bail. In the meantime, his landlord promptly filed an eviction lawsuit against him. 12. Jason Nathaniel Perez. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in May of 2022, a McDonald's manager in Leesburg, Florida, spotted a naked man wandering around the parking lot and babbling incoherently. Later identified as 33-year-old Jason Nathaniel Perez, he seemed either crazy or out of his mind on drugs, prompting the manager to call the police. When officers arrived at the scene, Perez allegedly told them he needed to retrace his steps in order to find his clothing. He refused to leave the parking lot and told the cops to arrest him. And when they handed him a citation for trespassing, he laid down on the pavement. Perez reportedly became combative toward the police as they attempted to take him into custody, kicking and biting them as they put him in the back of a patrol car. After being placed in the vehicle, he began kicking a window. When an officer opened the door, he allegedly lunged at the cop. Police subdued him using a restraining device, and he was taken to a nearby hospital. According to an arrest report, Perez defecated on himself while handcuffed to a hospital bed. When an officer tasked with overseeing him released one of the handcuffs so he could clean himself, he allegedly became combative once again. The officer yelled for help, and a nurse rushed in to assist. As the two tried to get Perez under control, he bit the nurse, and the three began struggling on the floor. Thankfully, nearby police officers overheard the commotion and helped subdue Perez. And by the time he was once again handcuffed and unable to continue fighting, several of the cops had feces on themselves. Before Perez was even booked into jail, he was connected with another crime that had recently occurred in Leesburg at the hands of a naked suspect. The perpetrator had been seen breaking into the laundry room of a rental property during the early morning hours and stealing a fire extinguisher. Police managed to track down surveillance footage of the suspect, and sure enough, the individual in the video resembled the unruly man who was in custody. After being treated at the hospital, Perez was booked on charges of trespassing, burglary, theft, resisting arrest, criminal mischief, and battery. 11. Chrysanthus Amondi. 52-year-old Scotty Jackson was delivering firewood as a winter storm encroached on the Dallas-Fort Worth area in early 2024 when he was beaten to death with the very product he was dropping off. Jackson chopped and delivered the wood himself to make some extra money outside his regular job. He was making some last-minute deliveries on a Saturday night and was at a customer's house when a naked man appeared out of nowhere and accused the men of being on his property. Later identified as 27-year-old Chrysanthus Amondi, the unclothed stranger grabbed a piece of wood and viciously attacked Scotty in an unprovoked fit of rage. The crazed assailant struck Scotty repeatedly in the head with the lock before chasing after the customer who was receiving the wood delivery. Speaking anonymously with NBC5, the homeowner said that Amondi shoved him to the ground, then chased after him. Thankfully though, the victim managed to make it inside his home and immediately dialed 911. But there was little he could do to help Jackson as the attacker continued to bludgeon him in the head with a piece of firewood. Scotty died from his injuries. After identifying Amondi as the suspect, police tracked him down to an Airbnb across the street from the home. When officers went to arrest the accused killer, he was allegedly combative and refused to obey law enforcement's commands. Police subdued him using a stun gun and took him into custody on suspicion of murder. As of April 2024, Amondi remains in custody on $300,000 bail. He's been ordered to undergo a mental evaluation to determine whether he's competent to move forward with the case. 10. Benjamin Abelli. Early one morning in June of 2016, police in Athens, Georgia were tasked with the highly unpleasant job of arresting a naked man who jumped into the hopper of a garbage truck. 22-year-old University of Georgia senior Benjamin Abelli was suspected of being high on PCP when he dove into the rubbish. An officer arrived to find him lying on his back in 6 inches of foul-smelling liquid that had pooled at the bottom of the hopper. Abelli allegedly had a dazed look on his face and his pupils were extremely dilated. But he suddenly sprang to life and began screaming and trying to leap out of the hopper. At the time, only one responding officer was at the scene. He was waiting for backup and wanted to wait for paramedics to arrive before attempting to subdue Abelli. In the meantime, he pushed down on the base of Abelli's neck in an effort to push him back into the hopper. 2 more officers soon arrived, but they decided to keep Abelli in the hopper until emergency medical services were at the scene. While they waited, the young man's demeanor alternated between quiet and dazed, and excited and animated. When Abelli was calm, the cops avoided doing anything to stimulate him, but he eventually became erratic again. And when his attempts to climb out of the hopper failed against the officers who pushed him back in, he tried to crawl into a narrow space beneath the hopper that housed the truck's hydraulic lines. Worried that Abelli would get stuck and possibly hurt, one of the officers grabbed his foot in an attempt to stop him from getting into the space. But the police struggled to maintain a grip on his body due to the slickness of the putrid liquid covering his body. Luckily, one of the cops was able to place a handcuff around Abelli's wrist during the struggle, at which point they pulled him out of the hopper. Abelli allegedly flailed his arms and kicked his legs as the police continued struggling to get him under control. He was tased twice, but it had little to no effect, and he remained combative as the officers held him on the ground. According to an arrest report, Abelli was still fighting with abnormal strength after being handed over to medical personnel and taken to the hospital. He was charged with indecent exposure and felony obstruction, and one can only hope that he hasn't touched PCP since then. 9. Yakov Jacques Levy. Miami beachgoers were trying to enjoy a peaceful Sunday afternoon in April 2023 when a man allegedly tried to steal a jet ski that was parked along the shoreline. An employee with the rental company that owns the $10,000 jet ski saw the suspect trying to push the vehicle into the water and ordered him to get away from it. Later identified as 47-year-old Yakov Jacques Levy, the accused thief allegedly grabbed a paddle and struck the employee in the head. When officers arrived at the scene, Levy entered the water and refused to come out, while talking trash at the cops and giving them the middle finger. A marine unit tried coaxing him out of the water and onto their boat by offering to give him a ride, but Levy continued refusing to cooperate, instead throwing his watch at the officers. According to police, Levy continued flipping the bird, then took off his swimming trunks and made lewd gestures in front of beachgoers. He was also accused of splashing officers and throwing sand on them. Footage of the bizarre encounter showed a pair of Good Samaritans entering the water to help police apprehend Levy. But Levy kicked and swung his arms in an apparent attempt to resist arrest as a growing crowd of onlookers gathered on the beach. The video showed 4 men carrying him out of the water and handing him off to officers on shore, who placed him face down on the ground and handcuffed him. The suspect could also be seen whipping off his swimming trunks while the men surrounded him in the water. Bystanders laughed and cheered as the men forced Levy to shore, presumably because they were happy that the senseless drama was finally over and they could now resume a normal day at the beach. Even after being taken into custody, Levy reportedly remained uncooperative, but was eventually persuaded to get checked out at a local hospital. He was charged with aggravated battery on an officer, battery for striking one of the civilians who forced him out of the water, lewd and lascivious behavior, resisting arrest, giving a false identity to police, and more. 8. Christopher Lee Hughes. 38-year-old Christopher Lee Hughes of Bend, Oregon, was unaware that he had landed at the center of a police investigation for suspected drug trafficking activity, so he went about his daily life as usual. He also probably had no idea he was under surveillance by the Central Oregon Drug Enforcement Team when he allegedly met up with someone to carry out a drug deal one day in August 2021. By then, the authorities had realized that Hughes was wanted on an outstanding warrant for a felony parole violation. They were ready to move in and make an arrest. And it seemed like an opportune time to act when he was seen pulling up directly next to another car in a restaurant parking lot. Narcotics investigators aren't surprised by much, but they were not expecting Hughes to be sitting in his car naked when they approached. He allegedly refused officers' commands to exit the vehicle, quite possibly for obvious reasons, but he was eventually pulled from the car and taken into custody. The police were kind enough to dress Hughes in the parking lot while also detaining the occupants of the car he was seen meeting up with. The people buying the drugs probably wondered why the alleged drug dealer wasn't wearing any clothes. During a search of the wanted man's vehicle, officers found a commercial quantity of methamphetamine, a scale, brass knuckles, pepper spray, and drug packing materials. In addition to the parole violation he was wanted on, Hughes was charged with unlawful delivery of methamphetamine. He was also charged with unlawful manufacturing of methamphetamine, unlawful possession of methamphetamine, and a felony weapon charge. 7. Adam Bellanuane. On a summer evening in August 2023, police found 23-year-old Darian Dominguez murdered inside his New Orleans apartment. He'd been bludgeoned to death with a golf club and covered with a sheet, which failed to conceal the blood spatter and brain matter that had stained the floor and ceiling. The horrific crime was traced to the victim's roommate, 24-year-old Adam Bellanuane, who was found near the crime scene naked and covered in blood, wearing only a hard hat and shoes. According to investigators, Bellanuane was convinced that his girlfriend was cheating on him with the victim. He was charged with second-degree murder. However, he was impossible to communicate with in court, prompting the judge to determine that he was incompetent to stand trial. Bellanuane was ordered to the care of a state psychiatric hospital for 2 months to see if doctors were capable of restoring him to competency. In cases like this, the defendant will typically remain in the hospital until they're deemed capable of standing trial, or until experts conclude that their mental health cannot be restored. In the meantime, the case is put on hold. Dominguez's mother, Anna Brito, told the New Orleans Advocate that her son was in New Orleans for work at the time of his murder. She was unsure how Dominguez and Bellanuane knew each other, but she insisted that her son would have never interfered with someone's relationship the way he was accused of doing. Brito said that Bellanuane despised cheaters and wasn't focused on relationships in any way at that point in his life. She was determined to make sure her son's killer paid for their actions. And that most likely means that she's frustrated by the stagnant nature of the case and the uncertainty of where it'll go based on Bellanuane's mental state. 6. Alyssa Escamilla. Police in McAllen, Texas received some unusual complaints in late 2022 when several library patrons and staff members reported seeing a woman taking nude photos in the bathroom. Police also claimed that the suspect was yelling and slamming doors. When officers arrived at the scene, they were told that the woman, later identified as Alyssa Escamilla, was talking on the phone and taking photos in the bathroom, clad only in a thong. An employee said that this was the second time they'd caught her in the lavatory without her clothes on. After the first incident, Escamilla complied with the staff member's command to leave the library, but this time she got confrontational and aggressive and began yelling. Fearing that the interaction would escalate into physical violence, the worker left the bathroom and dialed 911. Police found some pills on the suspect and also discovered that she was wanted for assault. Escamilla was charged with indecent exposure, assault causing bodily injury, and possession of a dangerous drug. 5. Lonnie Betty II. In February 2018, police from 3 different law enforcement agencies visited a mobile home in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania suburb of Apollo after receiving reports that a young man was attacking 5 of his family members. At least one responding officer could hear objects being smashed inside the trailer as he approached the residence. As police surrounded the home, 19-year-old Lonnie Betty II burst out the front door naked and covered in cooking oil. He was allegedly high on LSD, which would explain why he was shouting "No, no, no, no" as he ran through the snow toward the road. An officer tased Betty, who collapsed to the ground then started rolling around wildly. He rose to his feet and began running around the front yard again while police struggled to get near him due to the icy conditions. Betty was tased a second time, but it had little to no effect. The cops eventually managed to corner him, but they struggled to subdue him because the cooking oil he was covered in made him extra slippery. Relatives told the police that Betty's behavior spiraled out of control after he took acid. At one point, the family's dog bit Betty in an apparent attempt to protect them from him. Betty was charged with 24 misdemeanors, including assault and making terroristic threats. But the family ultimately declined to cooperate with the prosecution and most of the charges were dropped. 4. Luke Voskresenski. Fugitives always want to be left alone until they end up in a bind that they can't handle on their own, and Luke Voskresenski was no exception. The 40-year-old cut off his ankle monitor and jumped bail in 2021 while facing a slew of criminal charges, including armed robbery, theft, and multiple counts of aggravated assault. He apparently thought he could hack it on his own in the Australian outback, but he failed miserably and was found cowering naked and clinging to mangroves in crocodile-infested waters outside Darwin. A pair of fishermen came to Voskresenski's aid after overhearing him shouting for help. He told the men that he'd been lost in the wilderness for 4 days, but didn't mention that he was a wanted fugitive. The fleeing felon was covered in mud, cuts, and insect bites. He claimed that he'd survived on snails while using pieces of his clothing for various purposes other than wearing them. The fishermen suspected that something was off about Voskresenski's story, but he was in bad shape. He was dehydrated, weak, and needed help, so they took him onto their boat and ferried him to safety. During the trip, one of the fishermen gave Voskresenski his own shorts along with a cold beer because he looked like he needed one. Voskresenski was met by a waiting ambulance and was taken to a hospital, where he was treated for exposure. In addition to the charges he was already facing, he was hit with additional counts of aggravated assault and breaching bail. After realizing that they'd transported a wanted fugitive, the fishermen declined to visit him in the hospital, but they seemed happy that he got the medical help he needed. 3. Erin Holdsworth. Early one morning in October 2011, a police officer in Bainbridge, Ohio, attempted to pull over a speeding female driver who was clocked at nearly twice the 65-mile-per-hour speed limit. The pursuit lasted for about 7 miles before a Geauga County Sheriff's deputy who was ahead of the chase managed to lay down spike strips. Both of the car's left tires were punctured, disabling the vehicle and leaving the driver with no choice but to pull over. Identified by police as 28-year-old Erin Holdsworth of Hiram, Ohio, the suspect exited her car wearing only a G-string and a completely see-through fishnet top. She reportedly had previous convictions for driving intoxicated stemming from incidents that occurred between 2004 and 2010. Bokovich described Holdsworth as obviously under the influence and not very forthcoming on where she was coming from, what she was doing, or why she was dressed the way she was. He said the suspect seemed too drunk to perform a field sobriety test and that she probably would have fallen and hurt herself. Holdsworth allegedly refused to submit to a blood alcohol test, but was otherwise compliant with the arresting officer until she was placed in the back of a patrol car. Video footage showed the young woman kicking and banging her head against the police cruiser's back window and the partition separating the front and back seats. Holdsworth was charged with operating a vehicle while intoxicated, refusing a blood alcohol content test, fleeing and eluding, driving with a suspended license, criminal damage, speeding, and reckless operation. She managed to avoid any charges for her nudity, which has to be a willful and wanton act in order to be considered a crime in Ohio, according to Bokovich. The barely clothed offender initially bonded out and was granted driving privileges, but her bond was revoked several months later after she tested positive for THC. About a year after the nearly naked speeding incident, Holdsworth was convicted of multiple charges and was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with the requirement that she serve at least 10 months before becoming eligible for release. 2. Matthew Bernard. Early one morning in August 2019, police found a woman dead in the driveway of a Pittsylvania County, Virginia home. Officers found 3 more victims inside the house, including the family dog. The slain individuals had all been shot in the head, and were identified as 62-year-old Joan Bernard, her 25-year-old daughter Emily Bivens, who was married to minor league baseball player Blake Bivens, and the couple's child. Investigators identified the accused killer as Joan Bernard's son and Emily Bivens' brother, 19-year-old Matthew Bernard. By the time the triple murder was discovered, he was long gone from the scene. Authorities cautioned the public to keep an eye out for the wanted teen. He was considered dangerous and possibly armed with a rifle, and 7 local schools went into lockdown amid the manhunt. Bernard made his location known several hours later when he was seen running around naked in the community. Footage of the arrest showed the young man chasing after a police officer as the cop delivered a face full of pepper spray. Unfazed by the pepper spray, the accused killer was also seen running up to a church caretaker who was standing next to his pickup truck and attempting to strangle the older man. Bernard let go of the victim and continued running from the police officer, who was still trying to chase him down. He was eventually intercepted by a group of officers and a police K9, who blocked the road and waited for Bernard to try running through. Prosecutors charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder, but the case has yet to truly begin working its way through the court system. Bernard didn't even make it to his first hearing due to an undisclosed medical emergency which landed him in the hospital. Matthew's uncle, Brian Bernard, told local station WSLS that nobody in the family would have ever imagined such a horrific crime happening to their loved ones, especially at the teenager's hands. Brian described his nephew as a well-behaved and good-natured church-going college student and an all-round perfect kid. He revealed that Matthew said he'd been having bad dreams the week before the murders, which appeared to be the only sign that something might be amiss. Court documents speculated that Bernard may have had religious motives for committing the disturbing act of violence. His mental health fell at the center of the court proceedings almost immediately after the case began, and he was quickly declared incompetent to stand trial. The judge ordered Bernard to undergo psychiatric treatment at a state hospital in hopes of restoring him to competency. But by April 2021, he had been deemed incompetent at least 4 times, landing him in the hospital indefinitely. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Brandon Wright. In August 2022, a naked Florida man, later identified as 34-year-old Brandon Wright, was accused of trying to rob a surveyor and threatening him with a machete. The victim told Volusia County deputies that he was working outside that morning when Wright emerged from a nearby forest with the blade in hand and demanded the suspect's phone, wallet, and clothing. Despite the victim's cooperation, Wright allegedly threw the machete at him, along with a handful of palmetto berries. The machete blade reportedly hit the surveyor's chest, but thankfully he was uninjured. Wright ran back into the woods and was seen leaving the area in a white Dodge Challenger a short while later. A license plate reader located Wright's car, enabling police to track the vehicle. Not long after that, authorities received a report of a naked man behaving erratically outside a gas station in DeLand. Footage captured by a police helicopter showed Wright's Challenger parked next to a gas pump with the trunk and both front doors open. His belongings, including what appeared to be a suitcase and several clothing items, were laying on the ground nearby. Wright was reportedly the suspect in a similar incident a year earlier, where 911 callers reported seeing him naked in the same area. The still naked suspect could be seen walking barefoot in the parking lot as he waved his arms around and yelled at people in a visibly agitated state. He then walked into the road, forcing drivers to slow down and go around him. He wandered around a bit more before dropping down and doing push-ups at the entrance of a convenience store parking lot. Responding deputies likely expected Wright to be combative, especially considering the fact that he had a prior conviction for battery on a law enforcement officer. But to their surprise, he laid down in the parking lot and surrendered peacefully as soon as he saw them approaching. He even put his hands behind his back and waited to be handcuffed, seemingly resigned to the consequences of his poor decisions. Wright was charged with attempted robbery with a deadly weapon, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
8. Lydia Leon Batuecha Maria. During July 2018, a 26-year-old exotic dancer from Florida named Lydia Leon Batuecha Maria was accused of stealing $1,300 out of a customer's wallet during a private one-on-one dance at a club located in Largo. According to an arrest report made from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, Maria made an attempt to leave the club after snatching the man's cash, but was quickly stopped by security. She then allegedly admitted to stealing the money and was taken to jail for suspicion of grand theft. The outcome of the case is currently unclear, but records show that she is not currently being held in state custody, which hopefully means that she squared away her legal case and has moved on with her life. 7. Video shoot gets violent. As the world came spinning to a halt as it coped with the first phase of the COVID-19 pandemic in April 2020, the American rapper Blueface apparently wasn't ready to set his career on hold for the lockdown life. Instead, he invited multiple people over to his home in Los Angeles and planned to shoot a music video. A fight broke out among a group of thong-wearing dancers when two women started ganging up on another. Blueface, whose real name is actually Jonathan Jamal Porter, seemed uninterested in breaking up the disagreement as he stood on the sidelines, watching and filming the altercation with his phone. He was also heard laughing in the background of the video while a few of the producers who were there at the time tried intervening. But the warring women continuously escaped their grasp, continued throwing punches, and went on wrestling one another to the floor. Shortly after the footage went viral online, Blueface explained in a follow-up post that the women weren't really fighting over him. He said that the exchange was sparked by a mix of a lot of Henny and some pretty bad attitudes. The rapper did not reveal how the fight was finally stopped, whether the police had to get involved, or if any arrests were made. 6. Flat tire fatality. 55-year-old Ralph Cross was discovered dead in his Wilson City, Missouri home back in August 2017, after helping a few stranded motorists with a flat tire. Someone shot him in the back, ransacked his home, making it extremely clear that the victim was murdered in a robbery. Witnesses reported seeing Cross talking on the side of the road with 4 women, whose vehicle had Tennessee license plates. They were later identified as exotic dancers Brittany Curry, Panisha Taylor, Jonisha Simmons, and Latisha Dotson. The women worked at clubs located in Memphis and Nashville. Investigators found records showing that Cross was at a local tire shop at the time he was helping the women. People who knew the victim closely described him as a kind and caring man who was quick to lend a hand to those in need. Because of this, it didn't surprise anyone that he took time out of his day to rescue 4 strangers that were stranded on a roadside. Cross was last seen alive outside his home early the next morning by a neighbor, who said that they overheard an argument between Cross and 3 of the women, while a 4th suspect sat in a car waiting outside. The neighbor also told detectives that he heard a loud noise and tried to see what was happening. He reportedly noticed 3 of the suspects rushing out of the house and jumping into the car not long after the commotion. As they fled the scene, the women allegedly stopped and warned the neighbor not to go into Cross's house. After being identified as the primary suspects in the case, they decided to turn themselves in to law enforcement and were subsequently charged with murder. The accused shooter, Brittany Curry, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to serve 16 years in prison. Records show that Panisha Taylor also served a 2-year sentence at a Tennessee prison and was released back in 2021. But it's unclear whether the punishment was related to her alleged role in Cross's death or not. Based on the lack of prison records for the other 2 suspects, it's unlikely they were convicted of playing a major role in the crime. 5. Yanelyn Rivera Bosa. What was supposed to be a fun visit to a Miami strip club ended up costing one unfortunate Florida man $62,000 in May 2023, when he got so drunk in a VIP room that he couldn't even stand up on his own. He woke up the next day and was shocked to find that several of his banking and credit accounts had been completely drained. According to police officers, the victim received private lap dances from at least 5 separate dancers, including 34-year-old Yanelyn Rivera Bosa. As the women poured shots of tequila down the man's throat, Rivera Bosa allegedly ran off with his wallet and cell phone. The victim finally sobered up enough to get himself home at about 4 o'clock in the morning. But by then, he hadn't noticed that his money was missing. It took a few hours before he realized. He discovered several large unauthorized payments to the club from his accounts, along with transactions that moved money into Rivera Bosa's bank account. Rivera Bosa reportedly admitted to making the transfers herself, but said that the victim gave her permission to send the money. During a search of the suspect's cell phone, investigators saw a text message from Rivera Bosa to her friend and husband complaining that the victim discovered the theft and canceled one of the money transfers. Law enforcement also found evidence that the suspect may have been selling illegal growth hormones and steroids to several of the club's customers. Rivera Bosa was later charged with committing an organized scheme to defraud, fraudulent use of a credit card for $100 or more, grand theft, and selling narcotics without a prescription. Unfortunately, the current status of the case is unclear. 4. Jennifer Lynn Morrissey. After becoming a single mom, Jennifer Lynn Morrissey started dancing at a strip club in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, just to make ends meet. In 2013, she began dating a 60-year-old businessman named Michael McNew, who was one of her regular customers. McNew acted as Morrissey's sugar daddy for years, paying her bills and supporting her financially through her drug addiction and run-ins with the law. He also took Morrissey on vacations and bought her expensive presents like cars and motorcycles. The relationship between McNew and Morrissey was on and off. At one point, Morrissey even lived with McNew for a short period of time. But McNew threatened to end things for good in August 2017, after Morrissey got with a new boyfriend who happened to be a member of a motorcycle gang. Around the same time, McNew went radio silent and stopped going to work. He was discovered dead in his home with a gunshot wound to the head just a few days later, after his boss got worried due to his absences and reached out to his family. Text messages from the day of the murder revealed that McNew kicked Morrissey out of his house and said he was going to put her belongings into a storage locker. He also said that he was ready to defend himself and warned Morrissey against coming back to his house. Morrissey responded to this with a threat to cut McNew's throat and gut him like a deer. She even said to get ready because she was on her way. She later claimed in court that she accidentally shot McNew during a fight over his gun, and that he charged at her like a madman with a weapon in hand. The court didn't buy Morrissey's self-defense claim for a second, especially since a friend she called to help her dispose of evidence testified that nothing at the scene looked like an accident. Detectives finally concluded that McNew was shot in cold blood at point-blank range, with the barrel of the gun positioned less than an inch from the front of his face. Morrissey tried to stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong, but the evidence spoke for itself. Jailhouse informants also helped to solidify the case against her. Morrissey was eventually found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. 3. Luracy Ashley Ross. During the morning one day in December 2011, a father of 7 named Boudreaux Briscoe was robbed and shot by 2 men outside an apartment building in Houston. He was there to pick up his friend, a 20-year-old exotic dancer named Luracy Ashley Ross, when the ambush occurred. Briscoe's cousin told investigators that Ross, whose stage name was Pocahontas, told Briscoe to meet her in the building's courtyard. The cousin was there waiting in Briscoe's truck when he saw the attack. The victim was immediately rushed to the hospital, where he passed away from his injuries a few days later. By the time investigators identified Ross as a possible suspect, she had already gone on the run. According to prosecutors, Ross lured several men she met at her job to her apartment building, where her boyfriend, 24-year-old Kevin Johnson, robbed them. A previous victim, Carlton Donato, told police that Ross and Johnson came to his home and robbed him at gunpoint. Johnson allegedly shot Donato before he and Ross left the scene. Donato survived his injuries from that incident and was able to identify Ross in a photo lineup. She was facing an aggravated robbery charge in connection to Donato's shooting when Briscoe was killed. 3 months later, Ross was captured and charged with capital murder. Records show that she's now serving a 50-year prison sentence for 2 counts of aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. She'll become eligible for parole in 2037. There are many inmates named Kevin Johnson serving time in Texas, but it's unclear if any of them are there for Briscoe's murder. 2. Olivia Bennett. In early 2015, a 22-year-old Ontario man named Alexander Sangwan almost lost his life during a trip to Miami when a BMW plowed into him one morning as he tried to hail a taxi. He was heading back to his hotel after visiting a strip club the night before with his brother, Andrew, who witnessed the crash. The driver hit Sangwan from behind and sped off without stopping. Sangwan sustained a serious head injury, along with shattered bones in his shoulder and leg. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition and put into a medically induced coma. In the meantime, investigators identified the primary suspect as a 26-year-old exotic dancer named Olivia Bennett, who worked at the club Sangwan was leaving when he got hit. She allegedly abandoned her car not long after the crash and went on the run, but turned herself in after realizing a manhunt was underway. Authorities quickly charged her with leaving the scene of an accident. Sangwan regained consciousness almost a month after the crash. While his family was relieved that he'd pulled through and survived, they were devastated after realizing the extent of his injuries. Shortly before the trip to Miami, Sangwan had been accepted to medical school, but these plans were put on hold as he started an extremely long road to recovery. The young man's mom told the Ottawa Citizen that Alex recognized family members and tried to speak to them, but could only manage to mouth words. Doctors predicted that it would take several months or even longer for him to regain his mobility fully and become functional again. His current condition and the outcome of Bennett's criminal case are unknown, but hopefully he recovered and was able to pursue his life goals. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Felicia Blakely. In August 2022, 2 families' lives were unexpectedly turned upside down when 34-year-old Raymond Goodwin and 35-year-old Claudel Doc Christmas were robbed and killed at Goodwin's apartment in Atlanta, Georgia. Goodwin's sister, Carletta Jones, was speaking on the phone with one of the victims at the time and could hear women in the background saying, get the money," after shots were fired. By the time Jones arrived at Goodwin's home to see what was happening, he and Christmas were already dead. That summer, Atlanta's club scene was booming. Robberies were on the rise, and men like Goodwin and Christmas, who carried large amounts of money during their outings, were often the primary targets. There were no signs of forced entry into Goodwin's house, leading detectives to believe the victims knew their killers and welcomed them inside. Jones told detectives that her brother and Christmas had been hanging out with some exotic dancers, nicknamed Peaches and Snow, but she didn't know the women's actual names. 2 days later, 29-year-old Lemetrius Michi Twitty was also found robbed and killed in a similar fashion. A gold Nissan Maxima he'd recently rented was missing from his driveway. Like Goodwin and Christmas, Twitty was known for visiting the city's clubs often. Shell casings at the scene matched the bullets that had been used to kill the previous 2 victims, leading investigators to believe that all 3 victims were targeted by the same suspects. A break in the case finally came about 10 days later, when a fast food worker called 911 to report a few suspicious customers. The incident came during a string of burglaries at the fast food chain, and the company's employees had been warned to keep an eye out for strange behavior. Officers arrived and found 18-year-old Felicia Blakely, or Peaches, hiding in the bathroom with 20-year-old Armesia Irvin, or Snow. 2 guns were also discovered hidden in the bathroom's toilet tank, and a Nissan parked outside the restaurant was identified as Twitty's missing rental car. During questioning, Blakely admitted to killing Goodwin, Christmas, and Twitty. She also confessed to several of the fast food burglaries. Irvin admitted to her role in the crimes as well. Blakely claimed that she and Irvin went to the murder victims' homes with plans to rob them, but she tried to shift the blame onto her pimp, Michael Berry, claiming that he'd forced her and Irvin to commit the robberies. Berry was never charged in connection to the killings. In 2004, Blakely pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole. Irvin also took a plea deal and admitted to a lesser charge in exchange for a shorter sentence of 14 years to life.
Number 11. Dandre Powell. One day in 2021, while providing a ride to a Lyft customer in South El Monte, California, 67-year-old rideshare driver Paul Liao suddenly found himself being robbed at gunpoint by the man sitting in his back seat. Dashcam footage showed the suspect demanding money and grabbing the driver's phone in the parking lot of a gas station. The armed thief also allegedly tried to steal the car, but Liao managed to talk him out of it. In addition to having his phone stolen, Liao handed over his wallet, which contained more than $1,500 in cash. He was struck in the face with the robber's gun at least twice during the encounter, leaving his face bruised and bloody. The case gained widespread attention after Liao's daughter-in-law created a crowdfunding campaign to help raise money for medical bills and to replace the stolen phone and money. In just 1 week, more than $32,000 in donations poured in. It was far more than Liao or his family expected, and they were grateful for the community's help. Police identified the suspect as Dandre Lawrence Powell with help from the public and arrested him in connection with the incident. Number 10. Sherry Moody. During a shared Lyft ride in Miami Beach in 2018, a customer was allegedly kicked, slapped, and scratched by a fellow passenger in an unprovoked attack. The victim, 57-year-old Jose Gonzalez, said that his attacker got upset at the driver for picking him up and made some extremely rude, derogatory remarks. He accused Sherry Moody of kicking him in the head with her high heel, causing a puncture wound. According to police, Moody seemed intoxicated and became belligerent toward the driver when he refused to take her through a drive-thru for fast food. When she assaulted Gonzalez, the driver decided he had had enough of her behavior. He pulled over, removed Moody and her friend from the vehicle, and drove Gonzalez home. Authorities charged Moody with felony battery. While she dealt with her legal case, Gonzalez filed a lawsuit against Lyft for allegedly failing to protect him as a customer. Number 9. Brandy Luttrell. A Lyft ride that started out like any other quickly turned violent for driver Brandy Luttrell after she picked up a young man in Jackson, Mississippi one day in 2021. She made small talk with the passenger, who told her he was on his way to his job at a fast food restaurant. Out of nowhere, the customer pulled a gun and ordered Brandy into the back seat of the vehicle. He took her phone and credit cards, drove to a remote wooded area, and shot her at least 6 times before leaving her for dead with bullet wounds to her legs, arms, and shoulders. At 36 years old, Brandy thought her life was over, but she mustered up the strength to crawl to a residence nearby, and they called for help. She underwent emergency surgery and miraculously survived, and was coherent enough to provide law enforcement with information about her alleged attacker, Dontarius McGee. Authorities charged the young man with carjacking, kidnapping, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. McGee reportedly confessed to the crime during questioning. Brandy had to learn how to walk and do other basic things all over again. She made a full physical recovery, but still battles with the emotional trauma of what she went through, although she made it clear during an interview with WJTV that she does not let the suspect control her thoughts or her life. In addition to driving for an all-female rideshare company, Brandy is now an advocate for rideshare drivers who campaigns to raise awareness about safety. Number 8. Kevin Rojas. In early 2022, authorities in Miami Beach, Florida accused a 28-year-old Lyft driver named Kevin Rojas of brutally attacking a tourist from Texas after she requested a ride from a bar to her hotel. The woman had ordered the car when she started feeling sick and decided it was time to call it a night. She later claimed that she fell asleep during the ride and woke up to realize that Rojas had allegedly passed by the hotel and was continuing to drive around. According to a police report, the driver parked at some point and climbed into the back seat, where he proceeded to attack the victim. She told police that she was too intoxicated to fight him off and that he dropped her off at her hotel after the assault. Rojas was charged with battery and was immediately removed from the lift platform once the company learned of the allegations against him. He was initially held on $500,000 bond, and the police report claimed that surveillance footage was consistent with the victim's claims. But the state attorney's office dropped the charges less than a month later, citing contradictory evidence. Number 7. Gary Levine. Something appears to have gone horribly wrong for 74-year-old Lyft driver Gary Levine after he picked up a customer in Delray Beach, Florida in early 2023. It was the last his family had seen or heard from him. Over the following several days, Levine's red 2022 Kia Stinger was seen in parts of Florida he had no reason to be in, including the northern region of the state. It was then spotted in North Carolina, prompting federal authorities to alert local law enforcement to be on the lookout. A high-speed chase ensued as the police pursued the car across 3 counties. The Kia finally came to a stop after running over some spike strips in Ellenboro. As I'm sure you've figured out by now, the man behind the wheel wasn't Levine. In a last-ditch attempt to evade authorities, he tried to flee on foot, but deputies quickly caught up with him. They identified him as 35-year-old Matthew Flores, who was wanted in connection with a homicide that occurred about a week before Levine went missing. He was taken to jail for a parole violation along with charges of eluding law enforcement, speeding, and intoxicated driving in North Carolina. Flores also faces charges in connection with the homicide in Florida, and his role in Levine's disappearance is under investigation. The missing man's family members told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel that they were unsure whether Flores was a Lyft customer or how the car came into his possession. Number 6. Tevin Kimbugwe. During an early morning shift in Boynton Beach, Florida one day in 2021, Lyft driver Tevin Kimbugwe collided with a motorcycle and then hit a tree with his car. After making sure that the man on the motorbike was okay, Kimbugwe went back to his car to check on his passengers. The motorbike rider, 38-year-old Michael Radler, allegedly approached Kimbugwe with a knife measuring at least 12 inches, 30.5 centimeters long, and attacked him. Witnesses recalled seeing Kimbugwe fall to the ground as Radler got on top of him and slashed and stabbed him repeatedly, puncturing one of his lungs and cutting a large gash from his temple to his jaw. The victim was left covered in injuries, including defensive wounds he got from trying to fight off his attacker. Kimbugwe's passengers searched for police while the suspect fled on his bike. Authorities caught up with Radler less than an hour later and booked him into the Broward County Jail on suspicion of attempted first-degree murder. The motive for the unprovoked attack remains unclear. Number 5. Abdul Khan. 71-year-old Abdul Rauf Khan was working as a Lyft driver in Washington, D.C. in 2022 when he stopped answering his family members' phone calls. It was highly unusual since he spoke with some of his loved ones as many as 2 or 3 times per day. Khan's family filed a missing persons report, only to soon learn the horrifying news that he had been found shot in the middle of a road in Maryland. His car was nowhere to be seen. Khan was rushed to a nearby hospital, where he died several hours later. The beloved driver's community shared in the devastation of Khan's relatives, who were left wondering why someone would possibly want to hurt him. As they grappled with their newfound grief, the family tried to locate his car. By the time authorities caught up with the vehicle or the suspects, they had committed another carjacking. 3 young men were arrested in connection with the brutal murder. One of them faces charges of first-degree murder and carjacking, while the other 2 are accused of less serious crimes. During questioning, the man accused of killing Khan allegedly admitted to shooting the victim multiple times after being picked up as a customer. He's being held without bond as the case works its way through the court system. Number 4. Ingram Davis. On what started out as a normal day in 2020, 34-year-old Ingram Davis left his grandmother's Detroit home to pick up a Lyft customer. When family members stopped seeing him over the following days, they mistakenly assumed he was staying with other relatives, but they eventually began to realize that none of them had heard from Ingram and that something was very wrong. They tried to reach him through text, but received bizarre responses. One message said, Dodge journey, while another quoted the Bible verse, 1 Samuel 18:2. The scripture reads, "From that day Saul kept David with him, and he did not allow him to return to his father's house." When another family member texted Ingram, they received a message stating Dodge journey and another ominous Bible verse, Ecclesiastes 3:7, which reads, "A time to rip apart, a time to tear apart, a time to be quiet, and a time to be silent." Ingram's mother, Sylvia Anderson, told local station WXYZ that when she tried calling her son, a man named Steve answered and said it was his new number. He refused to interact after that. Ingram's relatives reported him missing to both law enforcement and Lyft, but they told Fox 2 Detroit that they kept hitting roadblocks with convincing anyone to investigate with the sense of urgency they felt the case deserved. A spokesperson for the Detroit Police Department reassured that the agency was doing what they could, but that they had no information to believe Ingram met with foul play. Months later, the family said they were still struggling to get authorities to pay attention to Ingram's disappearance. He remains missing to this day, and it's unclear where the investigation stands. Number 3. Rayona Oliver. Rayona Oliver, better known by her stage name Game Over Reedy, was primarily known for her rap music until 2015, but the New Orleans-based musician drew attention away from her talent and toward her parenting skills when she allegedly ordered a Lyft to take her 5-year-old to school. According to authorities, Oliver put the child in the car and told the driver she wouldn't be joining them for the 8-mile, 13-kilometer drive. She then went back inside her house. Instead of taking the kid to school, the driver went to a sheriff's office and said that he had told Oliver he couldn't transport an unaccompanied minor. The suspect ended up turning herself in and was charged with child desertion. She also had 2 outstanding warrants at the time. In a video that she posted for a short time on social media before deleting it, Oliver explained that she wasn't feeling well that day and thought it would be okay to send her child to school in a Lyft. She also said that the driver charged her for the ride, even though he didn't end up going to the designated destination. Number 2. Ella Goody. 33-year-old Lyft driver Ella Goody was last seen in March of 2022. She told her family she was heading from Louisiana to Houston to drop off a rideshare customer. They never heard from her again. 12 hours later, Goody's car was seen returning to Louisiana. The vehicle was spotted in Texas again the next day, and it was found abandoned in Missouri 3 weeks after Goody's disappearance. A few weeks later, police announced that they were now investigating the case as a homicide. They named 36-year-old Brandon Francisco, the last person Goody was known to have contact with, as a person of interest in the case. But they released few other details, and the case seemed to reach a standstill as Goody's friends and family members prayed for answers. Her best friend Felicia Broussard told Dateline that Ella was looking for a job when the idea of driving for Lyft came up in conversation. Goody didn't like the idea of letting people in her car at first, but Broussard convinced her to give it a try. She was surprised by how much she enjoyed it, but unfortunately it seems as though her fears weren't completely unfounded. Number 1. David Camacho. While riding in a Lyft down I-95 in Hollandale Beach, Florida one night in 2020, 48-year-old David Camacho asked his driver if the vehicle's windows would stay locked. The driver, Patrick Myrtle, replied that the SUV was set to keep them locked while in motion, but that he could open the back window for Camacho. When he realized the passenger had stopped answering him, Myrtle looked back and realized that Camacho had leapt out the window, bringing his ride from Broward to Miami Beach to a tragically early end. He was hit by another driver and died from his injuries. A Florida Highway Patrol investigation concluded that Camacho, who moved to the US from France in 1998 and struggled with alcoholism, had taken his own life. Earlier that day, Camacho had crashed a car, leading authorities to speculate that he may have recently relapsed. Myrtle was shocked by the incident, especially because up until the moment he climbed out the window, Camacho was acting totally normal, like he was on his way to go enjoy his weekend. The traumatized driver told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel that he was unable to work for a week following the disturbing incident. But he seemed to feel even worse for Camacho's family, whom he extended his deepest condolences to.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a roommate who prefers to wear as little clothing as possible while at home, but is otherwise polite and respectful, or a fully clothed roommate with a multitude of irritating habits? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time. Bye.